So today we're talking about SNL at home, which I was really surprised to see a few weeks ago. I just kind of thought that they were not going to be doing SNL for the rest of the season or while the lockdown was in place in New York. So I was really surprised to see that they decided to really go a different direction with it and push ahead. Um, so today, Ralph is going to be, I guess we're going to kind of co-lead the discussion today. And it's going to be pretty loose and unstructured, and it's a small group, which is really nice. So maybe, Ralph, unless you have any other thoughts, we can start with some maybe first impressions.
Sure. I did want to add one thing, and maybe this will come up later, but I think it's been, I don't know if you have availed yourself of some of the opportunities of things that different arts organizations are making available online during this. The National Theater, the Globe Theater, the Stratford Festival are making available recordings of past performances. There are cabaret performances from New York. The Time Out magazine in New York has a column they put up basically every day that has free, and it ranges from very traditional, recognizable, versions of Shakespeare plays to really out there weird stuff that was done, experimental theatrical film productions that were done in the 80s, up through experimental weird things going on now. So in a way, it's really interesting, like with this show, to see the creative response to these circumstances we're in. So I just wanted to mention that in case any of you were, I'm sure you're taking advantage of some of that too, to see how people are. And maybe eventually we can talk about Pink Floyd, but we'll get there later.
Yeah, it is interesting how so many traditionally live entertainment is kind of just shifting online, sometimes on social media, sometimes through other web platforms. I follow the Alvin Ailey Theater in New York, and they, like, all their dancers are doing just kind of like airing their practice, their at-home practice. The San Francisco Ballet Company is doing the same thing. Yeah, do you guys have any other suggestions for places that we can find live performances online right now?
Well, you know what I think is interesting too is the way that musicians who would normally perform in bars or on street corners and work for tips have been doing it virtually through Venmo or PayPal. I saw a thing on clubbing the other day where clubs are actually charging covers and you have a line to get in and you have to wear a dress code. I think it's just really fascinating. And I don't know if I looked at it before and it's totally escaping my mind, but there was actually like a festival where people were working on collecting all of those things like Ralph noted in an actual calendar so that you can go to one place. I have it bookmarked somewhere. Maybe somebody knows it right off the top of their head, but I just think it's really interesting also.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing for me was finally being able to see the Benedict Cumberbatch performance as the creature in Frankenstein, which was amazing. It was, I don't know if you knew about this, but at the National Theater, they were doing a version of Frankenstein where Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller were in it, and they would reverse roles of either playing Victor or the creature from one night to the next. And they actually had both of them available for streaming a couple weeks ago. So it's just incredible to be able to see some of the stuff that you wouldn't otherwise. In fact, there's a version of Streetcar Named Desire that starts, I think, this Thursday with Gillian Anderson in it. That's streaming. I believe it's from the National Theater, but I mean, it's just opportunities to see things. And I'm kind of hoping that, when our culture is put together back a little bit, that doesn't go away, because I just think it's amazingly kind of this weird bridge between live and not live. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting shift in access in some ways for people who are not located near or can't afford these kinds of experiences, assuming that, like the digital divide is still quite wide as well. But for those who have access to fast internet and a computer, oh, I was just going to say welcome to Jamie, and I think Jamie left. Yeah, it's
oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
That question of access is really interesting too, because people who might not, be able, not just afford or be able to go, geographically to these kinds of things, I think it also lowers that barrier when you can, listen from your living room, or, you know what I mean, rather than dressing up and going to a place where, maybe it might feel a little bit awkward. I'm reminded of a documentary that I saw with Kehinde Wiley, the artist, and when he did the portraits of African American women, and they were in the gallery space and talking about how, they just never felt like that was a space for them before. So I think that it's interesting now that we can traverse these different kinds of boundaries from the comfort of our home, but like comfort, a word that's kind of loaded.
Mm-hmm. What was the name of that documentary?
Let me look it up really quick. It was really good.
Yeah, I love his work. He's incredible.
Yeah.
I keep on,
I'll
kept
put it
on
in
telling
chat.
people, yeah, go to the, if you have a chance, of course you can't right now, but if you have a chance to go to the National Portrait Gallery, go now before it gets ruined. And
Ruined by what?
the Obama portrait by Kehinde Wiley is amazing.
I think it was An Economy of Grace.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm going to put it in the chat for you guys.
Great. Thank you very much.
Any recommendations you have, and Ralph, you can just email me later if you want, because you have a lot of recommendations, which is amazing. I'll send them out when I send out the video of this meeting.
Yeah, I'll try to send a link for that timeout list, because it's worth having a look at, because it's just kind of amazing what people are doing. But what do you, so I think we were supposed to be talking about the Saturday Night Live approach to this problem. So what was your initial impression of that, of what they've been doing for the past, well, I guess they did kind of a clip show this past week, but then the 3 weeks before that was when they were doing the at home, right? So.
I could start us off. It's been a long time since I watched Saturday Night Live. I have to admit it. And partially it's because my lifestyle no longer has me awake at midnight, shall we say. But also I felt that my culture is now distinct from the Saturday Night Live culture that is that we experience there. That being said, these last 3 at-home episodes, I have felt like I belonged. I related to the topics, the issues, the actors, the artists, and the presentation mode. I felt like I was their audience, and I have to give them a lot of credit for recreating themselves in this way that not only sustains the tenor of what they have been doing for 45 years, but also maybe reawakened an older audience to return to them. So I'll start us off.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Carolyn. And hi, Renee.
Oh, Renee.
Sorry, I'm late. Hi, Amy. Okay. Hi, Ralph. Hi, Mary.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Fawn. Fawn, I don't know you. Will you introduce yourself to me?
Yeah, hi, I am an assistant professor at Sonoma State University in adolescent and digital literacies.
Wonderful. Welcome.
I was going to jump in. You know what I thought when I was first watching, my first impression of SNL was, and then I got to run and get kids up and out of bed because they don't do that without me. I was reminded of what my kids watch all the time on TikTok, all these little video skits. So like with the RGB one, for example, the first one that showed was, it reminded me of something that, audiences or people everywhere do in these little tiny short videos, these skits and different things where with like home props. So that was one of my first impressions was, oh, this is interesting. It's a longer version of what my kids are addicted to and watch all the time.
Interesting.
I also like that homemade feeling. I like that homemade feeling. Kate McKinnon, I think, does it better than any of the other cast members, but that homemade feeling. How about the one where she was the isolated lighthouse guy, and she made a she made a beard out of a wig, I guess. I mean, she's a genius.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so fun to see those takes on things that we watch, right? That we, it's those cultural connections, and to see, the creative ways that without, I don't know, it's just so much different without all the weight of, scripts and production and all of those things. It just felt a lot different, and it was fun.
Mm-hmm. Amy, you were going to say something a minute ago?
Yeah, I liked, I actually tried to watch the very first one, with Tom Hanks that was doing it. And I was kind of testing it with some 20-somethings because they have a different lens on different stuff. And it's just interesting. I think they laughed at the fact that he said, it's SNL. You're going to have some good stuff and you're going to have some stinkers. And they're like, yeah, which is true. I mean, it's hit or miss with SNL. And I love, like Kate McKinnon, she's amazing. But I think that particular one, when they launched it, was really impressive because it was almost like a little competition between them of who could produce their own little sketch to be a real winner. And I mean, even like Pete Davidson doing the Drake riff, I mean, that was brilliant in terms of, this is a Drake song, I just was cracking up. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. So I think that behind the scenes, unvarnished bit was very authentic and real. And I loved that part of it. I still think they have issues with hit or miss. The kids have, like, every time I try to watch SNL now, they're like, let's watch Trevor instead or whatever. They don't like the miss part of the hit or miss. It's like all the good stuff will be up on YouTube anyway. Just take the 2-minute clips. They're still very like fast. It doesn't matter. I don't want to sit through the other stuff. I just want the stuff that's good. So
I also thought in that first one, their Zoom parody was spot on.
Yeah.
Because we've all been.
That was hilarious. Yeah.
We've been in that meeting before with people who, so where you have to kind of, yeah, do that. But then, and they didn't, they sort of got to a little bit in a couple of the others later on about the mute button in the most recent one. But, the people who, like, we're all sitting here talking, and then in the corner will appear this box that's got a phone number on it. And you what you're going to hear is phone noise until somebody can get through to that person to say, mute yourself, right? All you're going to hear is the noise of them walking through Walmart or wherever it is that they are, kind of disrupting everything else. So, and this is all, I mean, it's just interesting. This is all kind of in the same way the show does. It's kind of like, making things up under whatever the constraints you're in are, which I think is really remarkable. But again, the hit or miss thing, I think is, part of my personal history with Saturday Night Live is, I'm probably the worst of the curmudgeonly fans of the very, very early version of the show, and drifted away for, many, many years, and found this past year enjoyable because of a lot of the political satire. But this was really, I think, remarkable from a media perspective in terms of the variety of approaches that were brought in to innovate. But what else struck you? What else struck you out of these episodes that you thought was of note?
Well, I watched it just last night, and something that occurred to me is how much, and I watched the first one, and what occurred to me is how much has happened in those 3 weeks since it was first aired, because the choice of Tom Hanks was probably connected to him having been an early survivor. And also just the thought about that Zoom call and a lot of the skits felt to me like, wow, we've really experienced a lot in those 3 weeks without even realizing it. Mm-hmm. And that what they're doing is now already established. What they were doing there is now established. Became their format.
Right. And the fact that they're incorporating satires of other, social things like church, right? How church gets conducted, or, they were kind of incorporating, the way a hosted television show can kind of marginalize the guests. When they had Charles Barkley on and he got to say, one sentence maybe? Just kind of like what, again, all of what's happened because of the technology we're communicating with each other in now.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I struggled with was I watched it via the link that was sent out, and I have been watching occasional SNL clips on YouTube, but to watch the whole thing with all those advertisements was, I realized how few advertisements I actually see. Mm-hmm. And how long it made it, those 6 ads per segment. Mm-hmm.
6 ads per segment.
At least on the link that I saw. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's on. I watched them on Hulu, where they just, so the ads weren't there.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
good.
watched it on TiVo, so the ads are gone. So it's an interesting point about, but the ads are not targeted at you, Mary. Were they? Were they targeted at you?
No, they were very general.
Wow.
Mhm. I think it was it was one of the major broadcasters. I can't remember which one.
NBC, yeah.
Yeah, coming out of Boston. It was a TV link. Mhm.
I think comedy, like all of creative work, constraint is a powerful facilitator of creativity, right? So in a way, what I wonder about is we saw quite a lot of creativity now when this constraint is new, right? Like, Ruth Bader, did you guys already talk about that? Ruth Bader Ginsburg lifting weights, right? Lifting the batteries. So I think, clearly the constraint of having to do it in your house, the competition, the sense of competition between the cast members that's brought about by the increased isolation. So I definitely see how the constraints of this production have incited a lot of creativity. What I wonder about is the constraint won't be novel for much longer, right? Like Mary said, we're all getting so used to this. It's amazing how humans are so flexible and adaptive. When they say live in caves, we can live in caves. When they say live on top of a mountain, we can live on top of a mountain. So we're so flexible and adaptable. I wonder, will they continue to innovate with the format, given the constraints are likely to continue into the future?
So what I noticed about that actually is interesting, because it seems like they're actually going backwards in that respect. So they've done 3, and that's all they're going to do. This last one was considered their season finale. But in the first one, of course, everybody is just kind of like flying by the seat of their pants, using whatever props they have at home, just kind of throwing things on the wall, seeing if it works. Then when the second time around, you notice like they've been delivered costumes and wigs, and they're a little bit more coordinated. And then the third time around, even like the weekend update they had green screen background. So each episode, they kind of actually started to revert back to what was the standard quo, which is interesting.
I wonder how much the writing staff, because by the last one, and I have to go back and look at the first one. I mean, the writing staff was as big as it ever is on the show. So I'm wondering how much of that was written and delivered rather than, improvised on the spot, which but one of the things I think is fundamentally interesting too is the whole fact that it's not live, right?
Mm-hmm.
Completely transforms, and watching people over time watching Seth Meyer learn how to not be in front of a live audience in his closer look spots, which are so much better now than they were at first. It was kind of uncomfortable when he would do a laugh line and there'd be a pause, but nobody's laughing. And in fact, they did. Samantha and I were talking about this before. On the first weekend update, they had something that was kind of sitting in for a laugh track. Did you catch that? Mm-hmm. Where it was sort of like people were online also kind of laughing in the background, which was actually felt awkward there. Just because it seemed like they were moving away from the liveness of it, but
it was very noticeable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting what you say about that with the late night shows, particularly. I mean, certain ones, again, the younger ones like Trevor Noah hit the ground running. He was kind of like, just riffing. Colbert was kind of like, where's my audience? I felt bad for him. It was like, oh, this is not going well. And he adapted. Now he's much more relaxed and he's taken the suit off and he's like, bringing his dog in and his wife. But he was like a whole different, person now. And now he's adapted. I mean, to your point, I think across the board with the late night comedy.
Yeah, that was something I thought John Oliver got that really early on too. Like the transformation of that program was pretty smooth right off the bat, because he was making fun of the white wall, and because his work has so much ranting involved in it.
It's so much, it's very verbal anyway. So yeah, exactly.
And last night we saw the first Hassan Minhaj audience-less episode of Patriot Act.
Patriot Act. I haven't seen that yet. Huh. Okay. How'd that go?
I don't know if anybody else saw it. Anybody else get a chance to look at it? It's he's topically it's about rent and how the rent forgiveness is working and how screwed up the eviction system is and how many people are unprepared to like go to court and they lose so consistently. So it's kind of an important episode, I think, for people who are trying to figure out a situation in terms of an eviction. And he mentions even in it how companies that are basically into it for the financial interests, because if rent is cut off and people lose their mortgages for the buildings they own, they go onto the market and they're being bought by large financial firms who are really ruthless in terms of evicting people and all of that. So it was pretty typically what he does, which is really hit a really specific issue really hard. But I think he's also
comfortable though in that without the audience and all that, because he does engage with the audience quite a bit, but he also riffs a lot. So
I thought so. I'd be interested to hear what the rest of you think about that if you get a chance to look at it, because I think it worked, but it's I love him. I just think he's
I love that show too. It's very topical and
and he's doing. I mean, it's like important public education. It's like public education happening on a weekly basis on one particular issue or another, which is also what I think John Oliver does.
John Oliver, exactly. Two faves.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to SNL, I'm wondering, oh, Ralph, were you gonna?
Oh, no, go ahead.
So obviously everyone, except for Colin Jost, who probably had Scarlett Johansson film for him, I hope. Everyone filmed themselves, and so the creativity kind of came across on a few different levels, both from like story or narrative and character building and costume and set, but also, so I think it's Kyle Mooney who did a couple of things where he kind of filmed himself as 5 or 6 different people, which I thought was really creative and I hadn't seen on SNL before, kind of surprisingly actually. Did you guys remember that one or have any thoughts about it? No.
There's a film that Kyle Mooney was involved in called Brigsby Bear, which if any of you haven't seen it, I think, and again, is another media project. Basically, the premise of it is this will get back to the Saturday Night Live thing, but the premise of it was that there's this kid who grows up thinking that there's been an apocalypse and he and his family have to live in isolation in their house. So they basically create a fictional world for him where he has all these friends who he interacts with online, but they're all people that his parents are pretending to be. And then eventually he gets out, and Kyle Mooney's the central character. But it's really, and he's obsessed with this children's television show, which has a guy in a bear suit in it. So anyway, but it's the kind of like weird science fiction-y, almost Kafka-esque thing that he did, I thought was really great. I thought people confront, and then when he got to the point in the last one of like versions of him kissing himself,
yeah,
I thought was just awesome. So yeah, I kind of like that.
Now I'm remembering the trick with the mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that how they did it? I have no idea.
Yeah. There's a couple times when I'm curious about the technology. Like, how did Pete Davidson get his mom into something that she's filming all the time? That was a good trick too, because his mom was filming like the Drake bit and everything like that. That was his mom filming it. And
it's called a tripod.
Yeah, I guess there doesn't have to be a person on the other side, right?
I think he's got a sister there too or something. He's probably got a couple people hiding in there somewhere. Yeah, Pete Davidson is a weird thing. Sorry, Ralph, we've talked about a lot of this stuff before, but I don't really understand the Pete Davidson thing. And it kind of struck me as like, oh, my parents probably don't understand Adam Sandler the way I appreciated him, 10 or 20 years ago. Is this just like, am I getting to the age now where there's a popular figure who is supposedly funny that I just don't get because I've aged out of it.
Mhm.
Or
Do you know the backstory of his issues?
I do know the backstory of his. Yeah, why do you bring that up in response? Just curious.
Because I think some of his humor, I mean, so he's a recovering addict, or maybe he's recovering, who knows, right? So some of the sympathy that his audience has for him, some of the sort of respect is that he has, you know, he's lived 8 lives and one more and he's out, right? So he's a vulnerable character. So the humor comes from the vulnerability. Did you ever see the one where he dances with J-Lo? That's a good one. Yeah. So he's a janitor. She's J-Lo. He doesn't know who she is. He keeps calling her Jello because he's like, he doesn't know she's famous. It's very poignant and tender. And so his character is this very vulnerable, very sort of at-risk, marginal creature. And I feel like it is a very unique humor rooted in his personal, in the blurriness between his personal life and this character he plays. At least that's how I would interpret it. So I don't think it's about age, how old you are or anything. I think it's just, if you have the background knowledge, you interpret his humor differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something about that kind of like also like edgy mental condition that he plays off of often too, which reminds me of like, you know, Bobcat Goldthwait and Andy Kaufman, and kind of that whole tradition of like somebody where you don't know how much of it is performance and how much of it is like trying to negotiate some, you know, crazy stuff that's going on.
Like Robin Williams.
Yeah, exactly. Robin Williams, people. Jinx.
Yeah. No, there's what's the guy who used to work on the Chappelle Show, who's got a stand-up comedy special where he does 3 mics, and on one of them he actually specifically tells stories about mental illness. Oh gosh, I'll remember his name in a little bit, but it's an HBO stand-up comedy special. It's really, really good. But it's interesting how, you know, sort of like what when somebody's mentioning before feeling like left out, and then by Saturday Night Live, and then all of a sudden felt connected again by what they're doing with this, which I think is a really interesting reaction. Because I found it, I think because of the rolling little bits and pieces, it was kind of engaging. Like, yeah, maybe this piece here isn't very good, but maybe the next one will actually like work really, really well. And I also like the fact that occasionally they like the Brad Pitt introduction, the Fauci thing, and then it got dropped and he became Brad Pitt saying something that was, you know, kind of political. So that kind of like moving in and out too was something I thought they were very effective at. The Hal Willner salute that they did in the first one, the music arranger who'd passed away.
Oh, yeah. That was so sad.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You know, there's another, that's a great observation, Ralph, and you're pointing out the Fauci, Brad Pitt reveal. I felt like Michael Che did that a little bit too. And maybe he did it a little bit each week, but sometimes Michael Che self-discloses in the Weekend Update, right? And he shares his feelings in a way that isn't funny, but it feels authentic.
It's like a fourth wall. He breaks the fourth wall in some ways. Like, yeah, I agree.
And I feel like that was for me, that was particularly effective because you love the relationship between Michael Che and
Colin Jost,
right? That the interplay between them is lovely. But when Michael Che kind of talks to you, right? The camera talks to us, the audience, there was some kind of rawness there. I mean, I think it was in relation to Ahmad. Wasn't that when Ahmad was sort of happening? I feel like he was, I appreciated that. I thought that was kind of a good use of his celebrity platform.
It was kind of doing the list of things to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really effective. So the news being what it is these days, which is kind of horrifying.
And the target audience probably getting most of their news from Saturday Night Live.
I thought the 3 episodes as a whole worked as a catharsis for us all. To see Miley Cyrus do the Pink Floyd song was so beautiful, and her studio was lit with all the candles and all. It was so touching. And then the Fauci narrative with him unveiling and then telling us all what we feel like. This is such effing bullshit that we're living, and he like disclosed that it was, and we all knew it. Like the facade is gone, and we're not going to lie to you anymore. And it felt like such a way to work through different feelings that are very contradictory right now in our times. And I thought they did a really good public service with it. Now, I don't know if everyone would agree with me. Certainly people of different political persuasion might not have interpreted it like that. But as you know, I read a lot of newspapers every day, and I'm just baffled by our times. So they helped me to kind of work through it.
Carolyn, you know, your English teacher identity is what I just love about you. It's right, catharsis. It's perfect. It explains the emotional roller coaster of the arc of the 3 episodes. Thank you so much for that. It's a very insightful way to think about it. It's a way to reconcile the tension, you know, the paradoxes.
I just, because of what she's just said, reminded me of a piece I was reading last night, and I just put a link in the chat. There's a piece on Vox that is talking about the, you know, this Obamagate thing that has materialized. The Vox piece is basically doing an analysis of this strategy that has to do with flooding public consciousness with bullshit. And it's a really interesting and I think pretty accurate description of what the strategy is behind these things that come up, and they just seem to take over the public dialogue for a little bit, and they're not really about anything. There's nothing substantial there, but they completely derail, you know, in this case, part of what they point out is it derails the consciousness of, you know, kind of how awful the response has been on the national level, and how what a complete failure it is. So, you know, basically, you know, it's sort of like underneath. I remember when I first heard about this, somebody said, oh, guess whose fault this response is? It's Obama's fault, of course, right? Which is where this Obamagate thing comes up. But I think the Fox piece, the Vox piece that I put up has a really nice kind of idea that and the problem is it then becomes everybody's preoccupation. You know, I feel even like a bit of a tool talking about it because I'm perpetuating it, right? As the media does when they have to respond to when something like this is brought up.
But that, in fairness, I do think that that's part of the media literacy thing, because I mean, that hit me hard in my own home, again, with the 20-somethings, because of all people, I mean, they live, eat, and breathe media literacy with me walking around, you know, dissecting everything all the time and misinformation and da-da-da. And then when one of them, my daughter's boyfriend, said something along the lines of, so what's this thing about Obamagate? What did he do? I said, okay, stop right there. What did he do? Look at your framing. Look at the, you know, and he's like, well, yeah, I mean, he's obviously, there's like millions of hits. I said, again, oh my God, you know, mind blown. I was so frustrated, and I was waiting for a Vox piece like this or someone to write something to go like, this is what it's all about, is seeding the doubt, you know, letting it catch hold and just keep that fire hose going, you know, which is really part of what we need to be teaching about is how to, you know, untangle that and you know, not have them thread and lace those things together. Because the very next day it was a different hashtag. It was something like subpoena Obama or something. And I was like, ah, you know, and I have noticed on Twitter, which is sort of my platform, they are pushing back, you know, the people that are wanting people to look at it like this is garbage. They're flooding that stream too. And I think that's sort of to your point, it's a double-edged sword, because they're flooding it to debunk the misinformation within the stream, but it's still keeping it going. So people are still seeing the hashtag. So if you don't open it up completely, yeah.
Yeah, I think that issue of amplifying is really something we all have to try to better understand. You know, you just give it, and in order, as we critically analyze it, we give it more attention, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really, that's got a blowback that we are responsible for, right? We keep it alive.
Mm-hmm.
I had a
this,
similar conversation about YouTube clips with a good friend of mine who lives in Oakland, and she's very well educated. She has an engineering degree from Berkeley, but she's also very susceptible to conspiracy theories. And she sent me a link last weekend and just said, look at this YouTube video. I can't believe this. And then she said, never mind, it's already been taken down, before I even clicked on anything. And so she's like, it's terrible how all this content is getting censored now. And so I called her and I was like, hey, I don't actually see a lot of things that have been taken down within minutes. Like, what are you looking at? And she's telling me about these conspiracy theories. And it during the course of that conversation, like, she basically had said something alluding to YouTube making a profit off of coronavirus. And I was like, okay, there's a lot to unpack here. And like, we had this like hour-long conversation about, you know, how YouTube makes money, why they're making decisions about censorship, whether or not that's right and wrong, and the complications of all that. And I started to think, like, so many educators and parents are being tasked to do this work with people who don't have the knowledge and background that I happen to have, because I just happen to be doing work on it at the moment. And so how do we expect educators to be as nuanced and have the depth of information to explain something that is such a moving target in a way that's at all productive or helpful?
Yeah. But wow, this is a big question. Of course, it's what happened to me last week or week before last with plandemic, right? So plandemic is the conspiracy theory that your friend was talking about. It was taken down it's an very anti-vax documentary, right? Documentary genre. It was taken down by YouTube. And then immediately people started making reaction videos because of course some people saw it before it got taken down, some people saved it before it got taken down, and so now and I'm trying to run a propaganda website where I would love to be able to put plandemic up there and have it be part of the corpus of things to analyze, but I can't find it, right? I can find the reaction videos, and so I feel like, yeah, again, we have a private company, you know, they want to claim to be a publisher. They want to claim to be a platform. They get the best of both worlds. And it's like, fuck, this is too much power. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm sympathetic to that argument. And that cuts across ideologies. It's just, they have too much power.
Yeah, definitely agreed. It's just that so you have to have a nuanced understanding of exactly what you're, you know, like, you have the knowledge to understand how exactly YouTube is making a profit. And you know what I mean? Like, being able to explain that out to people.
That was actually the News Literacy Project posted a thing of how to, when you're dealing with conspiracy theory people, you know, because again, similarly, I had something with an extended family member try to say, it usually is about making a profit or the patent thing, or they're squelching this. It was, in my case, it was Gilead. Look at what Gilead could be doing. And it's like, I'm sorry, I live down the street from Gilead. I'm in the Silicon Valley. I know everything they're doing, and this is not it. So let me just shortcut for you. I thought she was kidding when she sent me this text. She's like, no, my person told me this and and I was like, yeah, right. If you're trying to sell me on the stupidity of America, I'm already there, you know. And then she was like, no, really? I mean, I was like, uh-oh, you know. And then I realized, and so I tweeted it out. It's like, okay, you could have told me how to deal with these people earlier, because I just like railed on my sister-in-law. I totally dunked her being snarky. I truly thought this has got to be satire, you know. I was like, So it's that notion of how to deal with people that really don't have a baseline media literacy that is really critical for next step, I think, in all of this. We need to know how to react without a stranger. I would be different. I would start from square one and like, you know, might want to look at this and that. But someone within family or extended family or whatever, you sort of hit a different mark and start from there.
Yeah.
So
I think there's also there, and I don't mean to be like obtuse or anything like that, but there's a way of, like, conspiracy theories are beautiful. They're elegant in their own way because they're so completely self-contained and like kind of impervious to actual real empirical evidence, right? And so they become very seductive because they give people kind of a sense of power over very unpredictable, very cruel reality by thinking that it's, you know, it's not anything they've done wrong. It's that things are, you know, kind of stacked against them and have been for hundreds of years. And, you know, I talked about Robert Anton Wilson, who I would imagine most of you probably, I don't know if he's ever crossed he died quite a few years ago now, but he was the one who wrote the Illuminatus trilogy in the late 60s, early 70s. And then another trilogy of novels called the Schrodinger's Cat trilogy. And he was basically, he's like very difficult to describe, but he loved the idea of conspiracies and conspiracy theories and thought they were just really interesting to kind of pick at and see, because he, you know, basically saw Christianity as an enormous conspiracy theory in a way too, because he was also a part-time Wiccan. But very, very smart guy who just basically, when I was reading his stuff, it was sort of like, yeah, he kind of gets how this coordination between people's belief systems and whatever resources they use to kind of reinforce them, you know, they're very powerful. They're very terrifying too, because you do have so many people who are like, you know, just because some of the sources they use are telling them, like if you talk, a friend of mine who is retired but taught journalism for like 40 years and was a journalist and a nonfiction writer. And not too long ago, her mom, who is extremely conservative, told her she doesn't know what news is, right? After a career of teaching news, told her she doesn't know what news is because part of the sort of like Fox News circle is now telling them that mainstream media basically doesn't know what news is. So it's really kind of like these fundamental definitions that are, you know, really problematic.
One of the things I've been interested in about the Obama Gate of late is tracking how different authors, especially editorialists, are supporting arguments. And I think it's a really good exercise to ask our students to go through as well, because it's easy to construct an argument statement, to take a position, but how one defends it through reasons, details, examples, and facts is what makes it credible. And for some of us in the higher ed, it goes into peer-reviewed research. But that being said, there's been some great persona-based writing about Obamagate. I think, I couldn't find it just now, but I think it was the Washington Post did a whole examination of Obamagate. And they're like, wait, just wait a minute, and we'll tell you what it is. And they went through the whole article and they never got to what it was. It was just a series of accusations. And I think if we can help our students especially, or friends like yours, Sam, to step away and ask those questions like, who's saying it, for what purposes, what are they getting out of this, what are their backgrounds, and where is the evidence, and who is it that is citing this evidence, I think we can make inroads and help people to gain the skills and structures that they need to do this kind of work in their own lives. And I'm just preaching to the choir here, but I felt I had to say it.
So we are almost at the top of the hour, and I want to end on time because we have virtually viral hangouts coming up after this. But I have a final question for you guys. So going back to the Saturday Night Live episodes, these last three at-home episodes, what do you think is the value in these pieces of content in media or digital literacy teaching? Or is there any?
For me, I would go back to that creativity within constraint idea. You know, or the classical rhetorical idea of inventio. You know, what does it take to come up with an idea? Well, it turns out that restricting people, saying it has to be shot with one camera, it has to be 90 seconds long, it can't involve any special effects. It turns out that limiting people's choices makes your creativity flourish.
I think thinking about the advanced Bloom's taxonomy, that creation is now the highest level. This was very clear to me that all of these artists were not just spitting back somebody else's idea, at least for the first 2 episodes. Instead, they were reinventing themselves. And we ask our students to do that, to understand the power and place of media. And I thought that those episodes would be a really good way to show students how they too can do it.
Yeah, there was also this moment when and I think it was in the 3rd episode, the kind of satire of John Mulaney. I thought the fact that it was like basically turning its attention to itself as a satire of the creative minds behind Saturday Night Live was really smart and really spot on.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, Ralph, do you want to close us out here, and then I'll remind you guys about the next meeting and all? Do you have any?
Yeah, I suppose the closing that I would think is, I hope they don't stop doing something like this. I hope that somebody sees a template for doing work like this and, continues to do it, because one thing is, as Renee, I don't know if you intended this, but you're kind of suggesting the technology is, again, it's available to all of us. The distribution is there. So, there's a lot of potential for, it's sort of like, we have these conversations sometimes among my wife and family members and stuff, what are on the other end of this? What are the things that we're having to reinvent that are actually really good ideas? I love curbside pickup. It's fantastic. I hope it doesn't go away. And then on the creative side, this kind of work, I hope that somebody sees the purpose for continuing to do things like this. What do the rest of you think?
I agree with that. In fact, with the comedian side of things, I think using humor and laughter and comedy is just such a key way. Even with the comedy clubs here in San Francisco, they've been trying to bring together ad hoc comedians to sort of riff like a writer's room to decide what would work as a sketch. They're working with each other to see, to take things to the next level. And then they have a tip jar. It's here, you can see how the sausage is made. You can see how people are working in an SNL writer's room, and these are real life comedians that have been barred from their stages, and they're trying to figure out how to make a buck. So I thought that was kind of a brilliant use of creative thought. And then, helping out with tip jars and stuff to keep their, if you want to keep seeing these comedians and let them be able to come back, help out, I think that's a cool way to do it.
Oh, and that adds to the notion of access that we were talking about earlier too. I have a hope that things would continue to be accessible after this is over, and something like that is a great solution to make it available with the opportunity to donate.
One other kind of little recommendation. There's a thing on Netflix called Middleditch and Schwartz. Have any of you seen that? It's worth looking up. It's Thomas Middleditch and Schwartz was on Parks and Rec. But they're doing it. Basically, it's a live improv thing where they just come out and do very typical, get some feedback. They get somebody in the audience to tell a story, and then they do a whole thing that's kind of grounded in that story, and it's very reflexive about its improv characteristics. But it's really quite good if you get a chance to look at it. I think you'd like it.
Very good.
Anyway.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Gotta go.
Yeah,
Be well.
you. Yep. Talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'll send a video along with any links that are in the chat. And yeah, thanks guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.